4 boys disappeared without a trace. And what happened next still haunts an entire town to this day. It was a Kentucky summer that stuck to your skin like glue. The air in Ashland hung thick with humidity, sweet with honeysuckle, and heavy with that faint metallic smell rolling off the Ohio River. In late July 1987, the town was caught between two worlds, still small enough that everyone knew everyone, but restless enough to want something more. For 4 boys, that summer would be their last together, and in ways no one could have imagined. It would become the story that haunted the town for generations to come. Tommy Hensley was the oldest of the group, 13 and fearless, the kind of kid who led dares nobody wanted to take, but no one wanted to turn down. Jake Porter, 12, followed close behind, quieter, more thoughtful, but loyal to the bone. Mark Dalton was the middle piece that held them together, steady, good-natured, and practical in a way the others were not. And Ricky Cole, the youngest at 11, was their shadow. Whatever the older 3 planned, Ricky was there, always a few steps behind, but smiling like he had just been invited to something sacred. That summer, everything felt temporary. Tommy's father had been laid off from the steel mill and was moving the family to Lexington. Mark's dad had a new job lined up in Ohio. For the boys, that meant this was their last real summer in Ashland. The last time they would have each other, the creek, the bikes, the woods. They called it their one last adventure. On the morning of July 23rd, neighbors remembered seeing them in the Hensley driveway, loading small backpacks, snack cakes, a flashlight, and what looked like a compass one of them had borrowed from a father's fishing kit. By noon, they were seen pedaling down Route 3, sweat glistening on their necks, the heat shimmering off the asphalt. The last confirmed sighting came around 5 o'clock, near the old Colton Fire Tower trailhead. A man walking his dog remembered waving to them. They waved back. It was the kind of simple, forgettable moment people only remember when everything after it goes wrong. When dusk came, and the boys still were not home, their parents assumed they were camping out near the creek, something they had done before. But by midnight, worry started creeping in. Calls were made. Flashlights appeared on porches. By 2 o'clock in the morning, people were driving the back roads, calling their names into the dark. The woods that had always felt safe suddenly seemed infinite by sunrise. The police were involved. Search teams spread through the woods near Black Run Creek, following the narrow deer paths the boys were known to explore. Footprints were found, small, clustered together, heading downhill toward the water. Then nothing. The tracks vanished in the mud. Dogs were brought in, helicopters flew overhead. Hundreds of volunteers scoured the hollows. The search stretched on for days. Every sound in the woods, every branch snapping, every trickle of water set hearts racing. But nothing else surfaced. When the first week passed without a sign, desperation turned into dread. Families camped at the trailhead. Mothers clung to each other, sleepless and pale, while fathers stared silently into the trees. The sheriff's office put up a map on the wall, marking every section that had been cleared, every clue that led nowhere. One of the handlers reported something strange, how the dogs would bark wildly near the old gully by the creek, then suddenly fall silent, refusing to go further. It became the center of the search. But even there, nothing was found. Not a bike, not a piece of clothing, just churned mud and the faint smell of rot that locals said came from the creek bed itself. By the 10th day, theories began to divide the town. Some thought the boys had gotten lost and died from the heat. Others whispered about an old hermit who lived deep in the hills, a story parents used to scare their kids. And then came something darker. That maybe one of the boys had led the others somewhere they should not have gone. Through it all, Ashland held its breath. Parents kept their children inside. The woods, once a playground, became something cursed. People started calling it the Colton Woods Curse, half joking, half afraid, because it was not just that 4 boys had vanished, it was how cleanly they disappeared. Like the earth itself had swallowed them. By the end of August, the official search was called off. The creek had flooded twice, washing away what little evidence there might have been. Reporters left, volunteers went home, and the posters, those sun-bleached flyers taped to gas pumps and telephone poles, began to curl at the edges. But for the families, it did not end. Tommy's mother, Linda, refused to take down his room. Jake's parents left his bike leaning against the porch for months, as if he might still ride up the driveway any minute. Even years later, people in Ashland would say you could still see her walking the ridgeline with a flashlight, long after midnight, calling his name into the trees. The story of the 4 missing boys became less a case and more a wound. One the town learned to live with, but never stopped feeling. Every generation after grew up knowing their names, knowing the trail to the fire tower was off limits after dark. It was supposed to be one last summer, one last ride, one last adventure. But as the years rolled on, and the forest reclaimed their tracks, Ashland learned that some goodbyes never end. Because sometimes when the woods take something, they don't give it back. And for nearly 3 decades, no one knew why. For the first few days, Ashland refused to believe the boys were truly gone. It was unthinkable for kids vanishing within miles of their own backyards. At first, there was noise, radios crackling, trucks rumbling, the whir of helicopter blades slicing through the humid summer air. The Boyd County Sheriff's Office turned the Colton Fire Tower Trail into the center of a full-scale operation. Dozens of deputies worked side by side with firefighters, state police, and volunteers. Even the National Guard joined in, flying low over the forest canopy, scanning for flashes of color or movement. It was the biggest search the county had ever seen. Each morning began with the same routine. Roll call at dawn, a briefing over coffee and cigarette smoke. Then the slow spread of searchers fanning out into the woods. They moved in lines, shoulder to shoulder, their boots sinking into the wet soil. The air smelled like pine and decay. Every few minutes, someone would yell a name, and for a heartbeat, the woods would go still. Then came the echo, empty, hollow, unreturned. The families never left. They set up tents near the fire tower, clinging to the idea that the boys might wander out of the trees at any moment. Mothers sat in folding chairs, faces pale from sleepless nights, hands gripping thermoses of untouched coffee. Fathers paced in tight circles, avoiding each other's eyes. And through it all, Ashland rallied around them. Churches organized meals. Local restaurants sent trays of food to the search site. People from neighboring counties drove in just to help. For a while, it felt like the whole region was breathing as one, driven by the same fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, the boys were still alive. But hope does not last forever. By the end of the first week, the optimism started to crack. The dogs were exhausted. The volunteers blistered and limping. The first heavy rain hit on a Thursday, washing away days of progress. Creeks swelled over their banks, turning trails into rivers of mud. Entire search grids had to be redrawn. Helicopters could not fly through the low clouds, and communication lines broke down. What little evidence had been found, small footprints, bits of disturbed brush, was erased overnight. When the storm cleared, the woods were unrecognizable. That's when the fear set in. A sheriff's deputy named Harold Vickers, one of the most experienced men on the team, would later say the forest felt wrong after that. Quieter, as if the boys had never been there at all. Searchers began reporting odd things, hearing laughter that faded before they could pinpoint where it came from, or spotting flickers of movement just beyond the tree line. Most wrote it off as exhaustion or nerves, but something about the place began to change them. 3 days later, a small breakthrough sparked a surge of energy. A volunteer found what looked like a torn piece of nylon near Black Run Creek, a backpack strap, half buried in mud. Not far from it, a faint shoe print, too small to be an adult's. And nearby, wedged between two rocks, a rusted flashlight caked in dirt. Investigators photographed everything, bagged the items, and sent them to the lab in Frankfurt. When the results came back inconclusive, the disappointment was crushing. Still, the families refused to leave. They watched every new lead unfold in real time, every false alarm, every rumor that flickered through the crowd. Someone claimed to have seen 4 boys near a gas station 30 miles south. Another said they heard a child's voice near the abandoned mining shafts at night. Each report sent deputies racing through the dark, sirens wailing down the back roads, only to find nothing but empty fields and echoing tunnels. By the second week, the tone of the investigation shifted. Reporters from Louisville and Lexington descended on Ashland, filling motel rooms and setting up cameras near the command post. The story of the lost boys of Boyd County dominated the evening news. People across the state sent letters offering theories and condolences. But beneath the surface, the town was unraveling. The longer the search dragged on, the more people began turning on each other. Some accused the sheriff's office of incompetence. Others blamed the parents, suggesting neglect, or worse. Rumors spread like wildfire about a hermit living deep in the woods, a former miner who had gone mad after the shafts were shut down. Some swore they had seen smoke from his cabin. Others said he was just a ghost story for kids. Harold Vickers, the deputy who had led several search teams, personally hiked miles of terrain marked unfit for access. He described finding an old mining road overgrown with briars, leading to a collapsed shaft that reeked of wet earth. They dropped cameras down the opening. Nothing. After 3 weeks, exhaustion became the enemy. Volunteers began leaving. Food donations slowed. The command tent grew quieter. There was no new evidence, no direction left to chase. By late August, only the core families and a handful of deputies remained. They stood by as the sheriff announced what no one wanted to hear: that the search would be scaled back. The official explanation was simple: too much time had passed. If the boys were out there, they would not have survived the storms or the heat. The working theory was lost hikers. They had wandered too far off trail, maybe slipped into a ravine. Nature had done the rest. But not everyone bought it. A few locals still swore they had seen strange lights in the hills. Hunters claimed to have found campsites that looked fresh, with cigarette butts and small bones burned in the ash. Some believed the boys had been taken. Others whispered that they had stumbled across something they were not supposed to find, something hidden in the forest that people wanted to stay buried. Ashland, once united in hope, began to fracture under the weight of not knowing. Families who had shared meals during the search stopped speaking. Kids were warned never to go near the woods again. The fire tower trail was quietly closed off. By early September, the tents were gone. The flyers began to fade under the sun, and for the first time since it began, the forest was still. But for those who had spent weeks out there, silence no longer meant peace. Deputy Vickers kept returning long after the case was shut down. Sometimes he would park near the trailhead, sit in his truck, and just stare into the trees. He once told a reporter that he could still hear the boys' names echoing when the wind picked up, that the woods remembered what happened, even if it refused to give it back. The town tried to move on, but it could not. Every year, when the heat returned and the cicadas screamed in the trees, people felt it again. That quiet unease, that reminder that 4 boys had ridden into the hills and never come back. Ashland learned to live with the grief. It hid in plain sight, in half-empty classrooms, in shuttered gas stations, in the way mothers gripped their children's hands a little tighter when they passed the old trail sign. The forest had reclaimed the paths. The search was over. But the story was not, because even after the search ended, the questions never did. And somewhere deep beyond the reach of the search parties and flashlights, the truth was still waiting, buried beneath 28 years of silence. As the years passed, Ashland tried to quiet the ache that the disappearance left behind, but it never really went away. The 1990s came and went like a long, uneasy silence. The town kept growing. New stores, new faces, new noise. But the forest remained the same, deep, still, and untouchable. To some, the story of the 4 missing boys became something half myth, half memory. The younger generation did not remember the search, only the stories told around it. The way older kids swore you could still hear laughter echoing from the ridge on quiet nights. The trailhead at Colton became a kind of local dare. Teenagers would bike out there after dark, flash their lights into the woods, and claim they heard footsteps following them back. Parents called it nonsense, but even they avoided the place once the sun went down. The old wooden sign that once pointed to the fire tower had long since rotted, leaning into the brush, letters half erased by time. But for the families, time did not fade anything. Every July, the anniversary of that last summer came like a shadow. Linda Hensley, Tommy's mother, never missed it. She would drive her rusted pickup up the same gravel road that once led to the search camp, stop where the path began to narrow, and walk the last stretch alone. She always carried the same small bag with her. Inside were 4 toy soldiers, 1 for each boy. She would place them on an old stump near the ridge, kneel beside them, and whisper something only she could hear. Then she would sit in the grass until the light started to fade. Locals got used to seeing her there, small, still, and alone. Year after year, others tried to move forward in different ways. Jake's father moved out of Kentucky entirely. Mark's older brother joined the military and never came back to Ashland except for funerals. Ricky's parents divorced quietly, selling their house on the east side of town. People said you could feel the distance between all of them, like the loss had stretched something inside them that could never be fixed. The case files ended up boxed in storage at the county sheriff's office. Dozens of reports, hundreds of photos, all gathering dust. But one man could not let it go. Harold Vickers, the same deputy who had led search teams back in '87, was retired by then. But the case still sat in the back of his mind like a splinter. He had spent nearly half his life turning over theories, maps, and old witness statements. In his garage, he kept what his wife called his other office, a workbench covered in old topographical maps, marked up with red ink and tape. Harold believed the search back then had stopped too soon, that the boys had not vanished near Colton at all. He was convinced they had kept walking farther south, deeper into the Daniel Boone National Forest boundary, past the area that was ever properly searched. He spent weekends hiking those ridges, often alone, tracing creek beds, cross-checking them with maps from the 1980s. Sometimes he would come home covered in mud, carrying stones or scraps of metal he swore were from an old trail marker. His wife would shake her head, but she never told him to stop. Everyone in Ashland had their own way of grieving. This was his. The town changed, but the story never fully left it. By the mid-2000s, the Colton woods were fenced off, part of a restricted wildlife area. The fire tower had collapsed years before, its frame rusting into the earth. But even as nature reclaimed it, people still talked. Campers claimed they had found carvings on trees, initials maybe, though most were too weathered to read. Others said they had stumbled on an old clearing where it felt like someone had once tried to build a shelter. Then in 2008, something strange happened. A college student from Tennessee bought a box of surplus items at an online auction. The listing described it as miscellaneous recovered property from police storage. No details, just a lot number. Inside were faded notebooks, photos, and one small backpack. Its canvas was weathered and torn, but on the strap, carved in faint, uneven letters, were two initials. TH. The buyer thought nothing of it until they posted a photo on a forum dedicated to cold cases. Within days, someone recognized the tag number stamped inside the bag, a series of digits matching an old evidence log from the Boyd County Sheriff's Office. It had been filed under the Hensley case. When news reached Ashland, it felt like the town inhaled for the first time in years. The sheriff's department confirmed it was the same backpack logged back in 1987, one they believed had been lost or misfiled during the years of storage and transfers. The discovery reignited everything. Reporters came back. Detectives reopened the old files. For a moment, it felt like there might finally be an answer. The backpack was sent to the state lab for analysis. Inside, they found traces of soil, fragments of what looked like decayed paper, and a corroded zipper pull shaped like a small star, but no fingerprints. No DNA that could survive 2 decades of humidity and neglect. The fabric told no story. It could not say where it had been, or how it had left evidence storage in the first place. Still, for Linda Hensley, it was something, anything to hold on to. She told reporters it felt like a message, proof that her son had once been there, that he had left a mark too stubborn for time to erase. For Harold Vickers, it was confirmation of what he had always believed, that there were still things buried out there. Waiting, he brought out his maps again, traced new circles around old areas. He said the ridgeline in his notes matched the dirt samples in the lab report. Same mineral composition as the hills south of Ashland, near the old forest boundary. He tried to convince the department to search there again. They listened, took his statement, and promised to review it. Then the calls stopped coming. The case reopened officially for less than a month. A small investigative team re-examined files, interviewed surviving family members, and compared the backpack to photos from the original scene. But when nothing new emerged, funding dried up. Interest faded. The media moved on. By winter, the file was once again labeled inactive. The backpack was returned to evidence, sealed in plastic, and stored, this time under stricter conditions. It sat on a shelf with a new tag dated December 2008. Ashland slipped back into its uneasy quiet. The same families still lived there, walking the same streets, passing the same trailhead that led into the woods. The sign was gone, the path nearly erased, but the air around it still carried a weight people could not name. For most, it was easier to pretend the story was finished, to treat it like an old ghost tale told to kids who did not know better. But for the few who remembered those faces, those names, it was never folklore. It was unfinished history. Harold Vickers never stopped searching. He kept hiking those woods until his knees gave out, saying one day he would find something the maps missed. Linda Hensley kept leaving her toy soldiers, one by one, on the same stump, even after vandals knocked it down. The rest of the town just kept waiting. And somewhere beyond the ridge, where the map lines blur and the forest swallows every trace of what came before, something was still there, hidden under decades of leaves and rain, waiting to be found. And in 2015, it finally would be. Every case on this channel takes weeks of research, fact-checking, and long nights uncovering the truth. We do this because these stories matter, and someone still deserves to be remembered. If you want us to keep bringing these real mysteries to light, please like, subscribe, and share which part of today's case hit you hardest. For more solved cold cases, check the links in the description. Now, let's get back to the story. By August 2015, most people in Ashland had stopped talking about the missing boys. Nearly 3 decades had passed, and the story had settled into something old and tragic. Something that came up only when the summer air turned heavy and the woods started humming with insects the way they had that year in 1987. On a Saturday morning, a man named Daniel Merritt parked his pickup at the base of an old ridge west of town. He was not from Ashland, just a weekend hiker from Lexington who liked exploring forgotten trails. The spot was not marked on any map, but he had read about it on a forum for off-trail explorers. Locals called it the Limestone Cut, a steep section of rock and shale that used to be part of a logging route decades earlier. It was not a place most people went willingly. Merritt had been walking for hours when he noticed something odd on the slope above him, a patch of pale stone jutting out from the earth, as if the hillside had recently given way. When he climbed closer, he saw that part of the limestone had collapsed, revealing a pocket of debris tucked inside the exposed rock face. It looked out of place. Inside the hollow was a small rusted tin, wedged tight between slabs of stone. He almost left it alone, assuming it was old trash, but curiosity got the better of him. He pried it loose and brushed off the dirt. The lid crumbled at the hinge, and inside was a folded waterlogged notebook and something else. An old Polaroid photo nearly bleached from time. He wiped the surface with his thumb, and for a second the image came into focus. 4 boys standing in front of a wooden sign that read "End of Trail." He did not know it yet, but that photo had been taken 28 years earlier, on the same day four friends from Ashland had ridden their bikes into the hills and never come back. When Merritt got home that night, he posted about the discovery on a hiking forum. The photo caught the attention of a local user who recognized the sign instantly. Within hours, the post had spread across social media, eventually landing in front of a retired deputy from Boyd County. His name was Harold Vickers, the same man who had led the original search. The next morning, police contacted Merritt. By evening, he was standing beside uniformed officers at the site where he had found the tin, watching as they roped off the area. Forensic techs sifted through the dirt, photographing everything before collecting the notebook and remaining fragments of paper. Even after all those years, the pages were still partially legible. On one of the last sheets, written in smudged pencil, were a few sentences that stopped everyone cold. "We went down the wrong ridge. Mark's hurt. The son's gone. If you find this, tell our moms we stayed together." The handwriting was shaky, but clear enough to read. The next 48 hours turned Ashland upside down. The Kentucky State Police brought in specialists to authenticate the items. Paper analysis confirmed the notebooks, pulp type and binding, dated back to the mid-1980s. The Polaroid film batch matched a production run, discontinued in 1989. Even the corrosion on the tin matched nearly 30 years of natural exposure. It was not a hoax. The hillside where Merritt had found the tin was cordoned off and a forensic excavation began. The process was slow, methodical, and quiet. Shovels, sifters, and brushes moving through layers of compacted dirt. The deeper they went, the more they began to find, first a fragment of bone, then a shoe sole with fabric still clinging to it. A few days later, part of a small rusted buckle, possibly from a backpack. By the end of the week, they had uncovered 2 partial skeletons beneath the rock slide. Forensic anthropologists confirmed they belonged to adolescent males. Dental records were inconclusive after so many years, but mitochondrial DNA testing offered something more solid. The first results came back in late September. One matched to the Hensley family, the other to the Porters. Tommy and Jake. News traveled fast. After nearly 3 decades of silence, Ashland woke up to sirens and news vans again. Reporters filled the parking lot outside the sheriff's office. Families who had long since moved away returned to town, drawn back by the possibility of closure they had stopped daring to hope for. Linda Hensley was 70 by then. She told a reporter she never thought she would live to see her son found. When asked what she felt, she said it was hard to explain. Grief, relief, and something else entirely. Like being handed the ending to a story you did not realize you were still reading. The discovery site became the focus of a full-scale recovery effort. Specialists worked in tight grids, documenting every object, every bone fragment, every thread that time had not destroyed. The notebook went to the state crime lab, where conservators carefully separated the damp-fused pages. Under magnification, they found traces of additional writing, simple lists, half-sentences, notes about direction and weather. One entry read, "We think the fire tower is east, but can't find it." The more they analyzed, the clearer it became that the boys had not been victims of foul play. They had gotten lost. They had gone down the wrong ridge, a section that was not even on most maps in 1987. The rain and unstable rock formations likely caused the collapse that sealed them beneath. Investigators pieced together how it might have happened. The boys, following an unmarked firebreak, probably descended into a valley miles south of where the search teams had focused. Once the weather turned, the creek would have flooded fast, making it impossible to climb back up. With Mark injured and night closing in, they must have realized how deep they had gone. They wrote their message, sealed it in the tin, and left it on the ridge, hoping someone would find it. They never made it out. Forensic experts said the slope likely gave way, days later, covering everything in debris. That same debris preserved the notebook that eventually told their story. The case was officially reclassified as a historic recovery mission, not a homicide. The goal now was not to assign blame. It was to bring everyone home. Over the next month, search teams expanded their work across the ridge. Ground-penetrating radar was used to scan the soil near the collapse site. Late one afternoon, the radar picked up a dense anomaly, roughly 30 yards downslope. A new excavation revealed fragments of bone belonging to at least one more individual. A small piece of metal was found nearby, what appeared to be part of a belt buckle shaped like a truck, something a child might wear. DNA confirmed it belonged to Ricky Coldot. By the end of 2015, 3 of the 4 boys had been identified. Only Mark Dalton remained missing, though investigators were confident he was somewhere nearby. As winter set in, Heavy snow forced them to suspend the search until the ground thawed. For the first time in 28 years, Ashland had answers. They were tragic, but they were real. People began to gather at the old trail again, leaving flowers, toys, and letters at the entrance. Some said they could finally walk those woods without fear. Others said it felt even heavier now, knowing what had always been buried there. Harold Vickers stood beside the recovery team the day they packed up the final evidence. He had spent half his life believing the boys had gone farther south, and he had been right. He told a local reporter that the ridge had held on to them all these years, as if it did not want to let them go. The town did not know what to call it, a discovery, a miracle, or just closure, long overdue. But as forensic crews loaded the remains into vehicles and the sun dropped behind the tree line, one thought lingered in the minds of everyone watching. If that hiker had not wandered off the trail that day, if the earth had not shifted just enough to expose that tin, the story might have stayed buried forever. And though the investigation had finally given them the truth, it was the words written inside that notebook, the final message left by 4 boys who never made it home, that would change everything that came next. When investigators finally had enough evidence to retrace the boys' last steps, the story began to take shape in ways no one expected. For nearly 3 decades, people in Ashland had guessed and theorized. But now, thanks to forensic mapping, DNA confirmation, and that recovered notebook, the Kentucky State Police and a team of forensic geographers could finally see what had really happened. The analysis started with the topographic maps used during the original 1987 search. Spread across a long conference table, the old charts told their own story: creases from being folded in the field, coffee stains from late nights, and markings made in red grease pencil where teams had combed the woods. The problem was immediately clear. The map itself was wrong. In 1987, that section of the Daniel Boone National Forest had been undergoing major trail reroutes after flooding destroyed older fire breaks. The printed path of the Colton Fire Tower Trail still showed a southern spur leading into the next ridge system, but that spur had not existed in years. It had washed out in 1978, and yet, for anyone riding out there with an outdated map or local hearsay, it would have looked perfectly safe. Experts combined modern satellite imagery with what they knew from the recovered notebook, and suddenly, everything made sense. The boys had not turned west toward the tower, like everyone assumed. They had gone south, following what they believed was a shortcut home. That shortcut led them straight into an area locals called the Holler Bend, a maze of sinkholes, ridges, and collapsing limestone channels. Notorious for flash flooding, the forensic timeline reconstructed a harrowing final journey. After leaving the tower trail around dusk, the boys likely descended into a steep valley, following the sound of water toward what they thought was the same creek that ran behind their neighborhood. But as night came, the terrain grew steeper, the brush thicker. Somewhere along that descent, one of them, Mark Dalton, was injured. His leg may have broken or been trapped by a fall. The notebook entries, while brief, reflected panic turning into determination. There were crude sketches of trees, compass bearings, and one note reading, "We can't go back up." Search teams in 1987 had stopped nearly 2 miles north of that ridgeline. No one ever thought to look further south because, according to the maps, there was no south. In 2015, surveyors used drones to scan the slope where the remains had been found. A large portion of the hillside bore the telltale pattern of an old landslide, a long smooth scar where soil had once been torn away. Historical weather records confirmed that a massive storm system hit Boyd County between July 26 and 29, 1987, dumping more than 5 inches of rain in 48 hours. The collapse likely occurred right then. Burying the narrow game trail the boys had followed, the evidence supported a devastating conclusion. The boys had been alive when the storm struck. Forensic pathologists examined the recovered bones and concluded that injuries consistent with falling debris, broken ribs, cranial fractures, and dislocation patterns occurred at or near the time of death. There were no signs of trauma caused by weapons or animals. No struggle, just the slow, unforgiving force of nature. Investigators believe that after the slide, 2 of the boys, Tommy and Jake, stayed with the injured Mark, while Ricky tried to climb out for help. The terrain, however, offered no clear escape. Each ridge looked the same, the forest canopy disorienting anyone trying to navigate by sun or sound. When the rain hit again that night, any remaining chance of rescue was erased, so they waited. Inside the notebook, one of the later pages, almost unreadable, appeared to mention the word lightning. Analysts using infrared imaging recovered a fragment of text. "We see flashes through the trees." It might have been written that same night, moments before the ridge gave way completely. By the time search teams arrived the following morning, the entire area where the boys had been was gone, covered by mud, trees, and rock. What the dogs had reacted to near the gully back in 1987 might have been residual scent from that same slide zone, blocked by tons of debris no one realized had shifted. The more investigators pieced together, the more painful the truth became. The boys had done everything right, stayed together, rationed food, tried to write down their location. The failure was not theirs. It was in the maps, in the geography. And in the chaos of those storms, when cadaver dogs returned to the area in late 2015, they detected something at the lower end of the creek bed, about half a mile downstream from where the first remains were found. After weeks of digging through packed sediment, searchers uncovered 2 more sets of bones. DNA confirmed what everyone suspected. They were Mark and Ricky. All 4 had finally been found. Autopsy results showed consistent signs of exposure and dehydration, injuries from debris impact, and no evidence of long-term survival beyond a few days. The conclusion was heartbreaking, but certain. They had died together within days of disappearing. For Linda Hensley and the other parents, the final report brought a quiet kind of closure. It did not make the loss easier, but it gave the story an ending, one rooted in truth instead of rumor. Investigators held a briefing at the Boyd County Courthouse, detailing how decades of error and shifting terrain had hidden the truth in plain sight. They displayed the original 1987 map next to the modern digital overlay. The difference was staggering. The entire ridge where the boys had vanished hadn't even been charted correctly at the time. What everyone thought was an impassable bluff had actually been a gradual descent into Theolurban Basin. The sheriff who spoke at that briefing said, "Something that stayed with the town. They didn't get. We lost them." Ashland's residents wept as the footage aired on local news. The story that had once haunted them now had a shape, a real explanation, and a message written by children who, even in their final hours, thought about their mothers before themselves. When their remains were released to the families later that fall, the 4 boys were buried side by side in a single ceremony attended by nearly the entire community. The small churchyard filled with hundreds of people who had once searched those same woods as teenagers, now standing with their own children in silence. After the service, Harold Vickers stood near the back, hat in hand. He'd spent years believing he'd failed them. Watching the caskets lower, he told a reporter quietly that maybe they'd never really been gone, just waiting for someone to finish thest. That night, a light rain fell over Ashland, the same kind of soft summer drizzle that had started it all. The forest beyond the ridge was silent again, except for the hum of insects and the steady rush of the creek that had hidden so much for so long. But now, after 28 years, the truth was fit, and though the investigation had closed, something else was beginning the way the town would remember them. Not as 4 boys who vanished, but as for friends who stayed together to the end. When fall came to Ashland in 2015, Thayer carried a different kind of silence. It wasn't the heavy, restless quiet that had haunted the town for years. It was stillness that comes after a storm finally breaks. For nearly 3 decades, the names of 4 boys had hung over the community like an unfinished sentence. But now, that sentence had an ending, and for the first time, people were ready to say it out loud. The memorial took place on a gray October afternoon in downtown Ashland. The courthouse lawn was lined with folding chairs, and by noon, every one of them was filled. Hundreds stood shoulder to shoulder, neighbors, retired deputies, former classmates, people who hadn't spoken in years, but had been connected by the same ache since. 1987. The deputy town sirens had gone silent for the ceremony. Only the low murmur of voices carried across the square, breaking every so often when someone wept. On the stage, a state investigator unfolded a sheet of paper and began to read it. The words written almost 3 decades earlier in a child's handwriting. The message that had served rain, soil, and time itself. "We went down the wrong ridge. Mark's hurt. The sun's gone. If you find this, tell our moms we stayed together." And then the last line scrolled at the very bottom in faint pencil. "We're scared, but we're not mad. We stayed together." When the words echoed through the speakers, something shifted in Neckroad. It wasn't shock, it was release. After all the years of rumor, guilt, and blame, the truth was heartbreakingly simple. The boys hadn't been taken. They hadn't run away. They had just gotten lost and stayed by each other's side until the end. Families who'd once looked at each other with quiet suspicion now held hands. The years of doubt that had divided them melted away into shared grief. For the first time, the pain didn't feel like a private wound. It felt like something the whole town had carried together. The notebook that contained the message was later placed in a glass case at the Boyd County Heritage Museum. It rested open to the page where the boys had written their final words. On the opposite page were sketches, simple drawings of trees, a crude map, and what looked like a makeshift shelter. There were notes to their parents, too. Tommy had written, "Tell Dad I tried to keep everyone calm." Jake's line was short, "We'll see you again." The curator of the museum aide they'd never seen visitors stand so long in silence. People left notes, flowers, even small matchbox cars and toy soldiers. The same kind Linda Hensley used to leave at the ridge every year. Some came from other towns. People who had lost their own children and found comfort in knowing these boys had not been alone when they died. The Colton Fire Tower Trail was reopened that winter under a new name, the Four Pines Path. A wooden sign marked the entrance, engraved with the words, "Dedicated to those who never stopped searching." Every December, volunteers from Ashland High gather their 2 light 4 lanterns along the trail, one for each boy. They say the light flickers all the way to the ridge where Theforest opens and the sky begins to show through again. For the families, life never returned to what it had been before 1987. But it found a kind of balance. Linda Hensley said she didn't stop missing her son, not once, but she stopped dreaming about him, calling for help. "He's not lost anymore," she told a reporter. "He's home." The woods beyond Ashland changed, too, though not in the way people expected. For years, parents warned their kids to stay away, calling it, but after 2015, the curse seemed to lift. Hikers began visiting again, walking the trails that had once terrified them. The fear was gone. In its place was respect, even reverence. The forest no longer whispered tragedy. It whispered remembrance. Every so often when the wind comes down from the hills, it carries a sound through the trees. Some say it's just the creak off branch. Others swear it's laughter, soft, distant, young. The sound of 4 boys who went on one last adventure and never came back, but whose story finally did. And for Ashland, Kentucky, that Wassy, the ghosts that had lingered for nearly 3 decades were finally at peace. Now, when people pass the trailhead and see that wooden sign, they don't think about how the story ended. They think about the message those boys left behind. One line written in shaky pencil, meant for their mothers, but powerful enough to heal an entire town. "We stayed together."